we bought a shed. And before you say it, yes, I could have built my own, but I just simply did not have the time. So purchased a shed, which is awesome for storage, but it does not come with any ramps. So this week I'm gonna be building some custom ramps for both this store set and then also on the side here. The only problem is that the ground here is at a grade. So this end of the shed is actually up higher than this side, even though the building is level. So it's gonna create some trickery, but I'm sure I'll be able to work it out one way or the other. For the header board, I want to place this as close to this surface as possible. However, the way that the doors are made prevents me from doing that right now because there's this big overhang, which means that I won't be able to place my header any taller than that overhang hangs, or the doors will interfere with it whenever I try to shut them. So to fix all of this, I'm gonna go ahead and chop off the bottom overhang of the doors.
I wanted to be able to reuse the door trim after making the modification, so I used a flat bar to first pry it off before making my cut. Then I used a level in order to make a straight line across the bottom edge of my door and used my circular saw to make the actual cut. One thing I really like about this circular saw is it has a laser guide on it. Next, I started cutting all of my 2x material that will make up the ramp. I set up a temporary workstation with a miter saw and my multi-stand. I not only cut my header to size, but also the 5 boards that will make up the joist of the ramp. I set the header board aside and started working on finding the angles on the joist. Now this angle is going to vary depending on how high your shed is off of the ground, as well as how long you want your ramp to be. I held one board in place, making sure to account for the thickness of my decking material. Then used a speed square and a level to draw a plumb line. I temporarily attached the board to this shed so that I could go down to the end of the board and find that angle. I came down 2 inches on the nose of this board, placed a framing square on this mark, and then leveled out the framing square. I placed this board in my super joust to cut off both of these angles, then used this board as my template to make 4 identical ones. With everything cut, now I started attaching. I wasn't paying attention, I did not see that the dogs were blocking the shot. But I took all of the joist and started joining it to the header board, using 2 screws per joist. And I did make sure to pre-drill to not only make it easier, but to also prevent splitting. Trying to move this thing as is outside, it was way too flimsy. So I ended up cutting some shorter pieces to help stabilize the front of the frame. But before attaching them, I used a framing square to make sure the 2 outside joists were at a 90. Once everything looked good, I started attaching them to the side of those joists. Once again, using a pre-drill and 2 screws per. After wrestling this thing outside, I then attached it to the shed. You can see I just used a scrap piece of board in order to cantilever it up into position. And I did make sure that this was centered in the door opening. I used 1 screw in the center to set it in place, then put a level on it, adjusting it when needed, then finished attaching it with a few more screws. Next, I grabbed my shovel so I could start digging down a few inches. Since it's nothing but rock around here, I ended up having to upgrade to a grubbing hoe. I'm going to be going with 1-inch thick material for the decking, so I was keeping that in mind whenever I was digging down into the ground.
So right now I'm leveling up the ramp left and right, and this is the low side of the ramp, but I still dug down into the earth some so that I could set this paver into the earth, and what that's going to do is prevent how much of a lip I have going into the ramp.
On the outside-most joists, I made sure that these pavers were in line with the joist and not centered on them. And that way you don't see it sticking out whenever the ramp is actually decked. So I started on the right since that was my low side, and I leveled all of the rest of the ramp off of that side. So I would set a paver, put the level on. If it looked good, I would move on. If it needed lowering, then I would dig a little bit more. And then if it needed raising, then I would throw a little bit more dirt underneath it. Perfect. After getting all 5 of the limbs leveled, I then spent some time building back up the dirt that I removed along the front. Again, my goal is to have the nose of the ramp as close to the ground as possible so that there's not a huge lip to get over. And now it was the home stretch, just throwing on all of the deck boards. I am going with 1-inch material for the decking. So whenever I place my header, that's why I placed it 1 inch down, to just minimize the lip going into the shed. I cut all of my boards to length, set them in place, lined them up with both of the outside joists, pre-drilled, and used 2 screws per joist. I was pleasantly surprised at just how easy this project was. I was able to get it all done in just a few hours. So if you have a shed, then don't put this one off. The most time-consuming part is just making sure that the entire thing is level. And if you don't have a bunch of rocks to contend with, then yours will be even easier than mine.
Perfect. Perfect.
After getting the first one built, I've repeated the exact same process for the second one. However, this side is taller, so I ended up having to extend the ramp out a little bit more. And I also measured out where the end of the ramp was going to be and did all of my digging before making and setting the frame into place. And that was a lot easier than having to dig around the frame.
And that's going to be it for this one. Stay tuned for the next video. I'm actually going to be moving inside of the shed and organizing the inside to hold the motorcycles, lawn equipment, and a few other things. So I will see you then. Come on, baby girl.